Okay, welcome back to part B of our Dying to Know Day event. All right, we have a lot of questions and I doubt that we're going to get to all of them, but I have tried to theme some of them. Thank you to those that have actually directed your question to a specific person. There are some obviously in that financial space, obviously some in the palliative care space, and some directly around the funeral planning. So we'll get underway, but I'll say up front, if your question is not asked, just in terms of time, perhaps at the conclusion, if you want to direct your question to the most appropriate person on the panel. How does that sound? Excellent. Okay, so the first few questions I thought as the cab off the rank are directed probably more to you, Kerry. They're going to be around funeral bonds and going into nursing homes, if that's okay. So is there an asset amount that has to be deposited into a funeral bond, and can you add to it? So that's either Kerry or a Sam, or maybe even a Kimberly Shore Plan question. And just, it doesn't have to be a long-winded answer. Short and sharp's great.
You can put into a funeral bond any amount you like, so it's not that there's a minimum amount. The maximum amount is $15,750 if you want to get the Centrelink exemption, so don't go over that. If it grows over that, that's a different matter. What I particularly like about funeral bonds is, present company excluded, but if if a funeral home went bankrupt, you can use that with any home.
No, it's true, yeah. We encourage the funeral bonds because anything can happen in life and business. So if you were to put that money aside with a company, because some funeral homes will do their own sort of finance side of things, if anything happens to that company, or even if it changes ownership, sometimes those amounts can be not null and void, but they can be part of that liquidation or that process. So that's the reason why Shore Plan's here today, and as a sponsor, being around for about 90 odd years, we can trust that they're around for the long haul. So we recommend putting the bond with them, but yeah, there's no minimum amount per se, but there is limits with the benefits with your pension and asset testing, which, yeah, if you get the details from Shore Plan, they can give you a lot more information on that.
Excellent, thank you. Another one for Kerry. What fees are involved for going into residential care?
Residential care ranges a lot. If you're a government-supported person, so someone who doesn't have any assets or they've got limited assets, so say you've only got about $60,000 and your home is exempt because you've got somebody living there that qualifies for the property to be exempted, then your pension will cover your aged care fees. So if you are not a government-supported person, then the fees are going to range considerably, particularly after November when we've got a whole new set of rules. I would encourage you to take up a 20-minute complimentary chat with myself or my team, or you can actually go to Centrelink, as long as they don't cancel your appointment, which happened to one of my clients yesterday, and Centrelink can actually give you guidance on more on how much it's actually going to cost. The challenge that we've got is that if you do go to the aged care home, they can give you some guidance on how the government might assess you, but there is a government assessment, and that's going to be the big difference in how much it actually costs.
Thank you. Potentially another one for you, Kerry. What are the legal requirements of the next of kin of someone dying or deceased?
The legal requirements of the next of kin, is this after a person has passed away?
Well, it says of someone dying / deceased. So I guess if you're the enduring power of attorney for somebody that is dying or palliative, what are the legal requirements?
Financially, and I imagine Andy's got some points that she would probably want to share on that. Financially, notify Centrelink after a person has passed away. If they were a pensioner, you don't have to wait for the death certificate. That means that they don't get overpaid pension. If there's a spouse, they're able to get the bereavement payments. When it comes to the estate side of things, joint accounts will automatically pass to the other account holder. Anything else is going to come via their will. So, and if they don't have a will, then that just opens up a whole minefield. A lot of people don't have wills, or they think they've got a will, but it's not actually valid. I'm sure you...
Yeah, and just from a health perspective, so once that person has lost capacity, then their EPOA, their enduring power of attorney, then takes over all responsibility for making decisions regarding to health. And for example, the other day I had a patient who I wanted to just change some medication on, and the two sisters were in the home, and the brother was the EPOA. So before I did that, the sister just called the brother and just made sure that that was all right. So it's usually okay. It's really tricky when you've got more than one EPOA and they can't decide. So one wants active treatment, one doesn't want active treatment, and that's why things like your Advanced Health Directive or your Statement of Choices or your ARP is helpful.
They absolutely can.
When it comes to decisions being made, next of kin unfortunately gets dropped. From my financial perspective, I'd be interested to get, yes, and same with health, Andrea's saying. But it's all going to be down to the enduring powers of attorney, so God help you if you've chosen the wrong person.
And just on EPOAs as well, when you pass away, EPOA ceases as well, and it then transfers to the will. So executor of the will may be different to your EPOA. So keep that in consideration, that once you pass, it's now then your executor that makes the decisions with your estate, not your EPOA. So important to note that if you're updating your EPOA to someone, you're changing that you make it line up with your will to make it a bit easier when that time comes for that transition.
And following on from that, when a person is the enduring power of attorney for someone who needs to go into a nursing home, are they fully financially responsible for the cost of placement and drugs, etc., if the care patient has limited assets?
That's a really good question. So pretty much every aged care home will want a guarantee that the bill's going to get paid. You can ask for the guarantee to be removed in certain circumstances if you've given enough security. So that could be that you've said, look, I'm not paying a full refundable accommodation deposit. I don't want to get into the jargon, but if you're not paying the home a full lump sum, you could actually say, look, I'll put my property as security that you are going to get paid. Otherwise, we are getting a lot of enduring powers of attorney being asked to be the guarantor, but sometimes the enduring power of attorney is not the person who's going to be inheriting the money. So this is where I've had the conversation about, how about the person who's actually inheriting the money be the person who's actually being the guarantor?
Okay, thank you. This one's to Sam. What sort of funeral or farewell do you offer for someone elderly that only has family left as all their friends have passed?
Yeah, like I said, funerals vary drastically between what what you want to do with the loved one. When there's limited families, I mean, I've had a service in a chapel probably about this size with about 10 people sitting in a semicircle around the coffin, all just getting up and sharing and having a drink. And that itself was a beautiful funeral service and sometimes has more value than when there's 1,000 people coming up to a service. So like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It is about honouring the person who's passed away and starting that grief process and grief journey. So there is no right or wrong. Even people who've done a direct cremation, we usually say what you're doing with the ashes, the memorialisation of that can also be a ceremony that can help with the grief process. So whether that's, and you'll see with Final Touch, the urn supplier, they've got scattering tubes, which is a lovely way to say farewell, and to do a bit of ceremony or ritual around the memorialisation of ashes is a lovely way to farewell.
Beautiful. Now this one is to the whole panel. What are your key considerations when working with culturally diverse and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families in palliative care?
Yeah, so I think, so we do a lot of education. Hey, like there's so many courses that you can do and you have to do them when you start with an organisation. But I think the most important thing is to meet the person where they're at and to work with their local community. And that can sometimes be meeting with the elders and finding out what is appropriate. Often with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, they'll nominate somebody that will be kind of your cultural go-to, just so you make sure that you do everything correctly and appropriate. And I also think, so in this particular region, we've got a lot of people from the Pacific Islands and, like from culturally diverse backgrounds, and so, but not everybody within that culture is the same, and what's important to one person is different to what's important to the other person. So it's absolutely about having conversations and being respectful and meeting the person where they're at, and actually not to go in with your own preconceived ideas. Just because I've done the workshop at Queensland Health doesn't mean that I'm an expert, and certainly as a British woman fairly new to Australia. I didn't have that when I first came over, so I had a huge, massive learning curve. But I honestly think it's about being respectful. I've done some work, in the outer islands as well, and it's really confronting going in as a white woman for them, and also a little bit for me. And so we just make sure that we take things really slowly and really respectfully and ask questions. And if I don't understand something, then I think just being really honest and saying, "No, I really don't understand what you mean, but can you explain it?" And I think that's really across the board with everybody that we work with, but specifically for those vulnerable populations.
Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
It is an interesting space, and I'm training ministers now, and probably a good third of them are from other cultures, and that's been something. Indigenous people do funerals very differently to our culture, and sometimes it's a 2-week experience or longer, and other cultures the same. And it really is about stepping back, because we kind of think, oh, everyone's the same as me, and going and having those conversations. And I know there are traditions that don't even get talked about. In Pacific Island cultures, they'll come around and give the minister $1,000 cash in the hand, and you're kind of going, what the heck is happening here? And they think you expect it and know it's coming, and meanwhile I've sent them an invoice, and they're going, hang on a sec. So they're sitting down, and sometimes it is those things that you don't even think to ask, and you do have to go through how do you want this done? How does it work in your culture? And especially being the dominant culture, we think, well, a funeral should only go for an hour and it should look like this. To dial that back does take a whole lot of effort. And I love what you said right up the front, that you guys go in and it is meet people where they're at and go on a journey with them.
So so I do work at the Children's Hospice, Hummingbird House, and so in a facility like that, sometimes it's really tricky because, for example, if somebody wants to have a smoking ceremony, and we've got smoke alarms, and so we just really try to be really respectful and adapt what we do. So we had a smoking ceremony for a little baby that had died, and we did the smoking ceremony outside. So not quite what you would do in a home, but we try to be as respectful as possible. With a lot of our Pacific Island cultures, and you'll know this, Sam, like when somebody dies, the body's not to be left alone, and so we facilitated that. So after death, rather than the body go to the funeral director, we kept the child, lots of children, but we kept children at Hummingbird House and facilitated family to be with them the whole time. And also maybe not just 1 or 2 family members, it could be massive families, and you just try and adapt the best that you can. And it might not be as good as you get at home, but we just try and be as respectful and adaptive as we can, or I don't know the word.
Sam, perhaps from a practical point of view, if somebody is being kept at home for a week, do you want to talk about cold plates and things like that?
Yeah, so there's a number of technologies now that can help facilitate that. There is this cold plate technology that the body can be placed on that keeps them preserved without the need for invasive chemicals. So traditionally, if you're keeping them outside of any sort of refrigeration, you would use embalming to preserve the body to stop deterioration. But now there's new technologies coming in to try and assist, because there's a lot of religious and cultural that are against actually embalming the deceased, that it's not allowed and permissible. So it's coming up with, like Andy said, creative ways in which to facilitate the wishes, but keep it in a realm that's safe and comfortable for the families. Yeah.
Thank you. Just want to know more about advanced care directives and power of attorney, and how do we get into doing this? Maybe advanced care directive to Andy, because that's a medical one, and power of attorney I think we have addressed, but Kerry, if you just want to go through that one more time.
Yeah, so with your advanced health directive, usually you would, so this is to the best of my knowledge, okay? So usually what our families do is you can go on the Advanced Care Planning website, which is Queensland Health website. It gives you step-by-step information. There's also information about Statement of Choices. So a Statement of Choices is a document where you basically write who's important to you, what you would like, really practical things like would you like music when you're dying, who would you like in the house, all of those things. You also have a little bit of information on there where you can talk about not returning to hospital for CPR, etc., etc. That is not a legally binding document, so it's signed off by your GP, or a nurse practitioner can do it, like myself, and it's just to talk about your wishes. But the Advanced Healthcare Directive is a legally binding document, and so usually you need somebody to sign that off. Now it can be, I'm just looking at the room and you can nod your head, I think it can be a lawyer, but it can definitely be your GP, and they can do it. And I don't know the Justice of the Peace can do it, I'm actually not very sure, but all of that information is on that website. Then that gets lodged with the Advanced Care Planning people, and then that is on the system. So if you present to a hospital, for example, we pull it up on what's called the viewer, and we can see that information so that people are not doing things that you actually had not wanted them to do in that critical time. It's really, really helpful. I mean, I don't have an advanced healthcare directive, and I really, really, really should. Most people who talk about death all the time might not have some of those things, but you really should, and it's a really helpful document when you get to the pointy end of maybe not being able to make the decisions yourself. Then your family are not left with having to make those really tricky decisions and second guessing themselves.
Yes, you can.
Very
Yep.
good.
Thank you. Normally, last year we did have Michelle Linton. We won't be taking questions from the floor, sorry. Michelle Linton was here from Queensland Health. She's the Advanced Care Planning Coordinator for Redcliffe Hospital and this region. We did invite her to join us today, but she's actually on leave. So apologies that we didn't have that particular information here today, but we'll aim to have her again next year. And quickly, Kerry, just on appointing an enduring power of attorney, how do you do that?
How you appoint an enduring power of attorney, I would suggest that you actually talk to the person and make sure that they know that they're acting. Otherwise, if you're an accountant or you're a lawyer, suddenly finds that they're making decisions for you. I've seen plenty of them go, oh my goodness, they never asked me to do that. And suddenly they decline, and we're in a QCAT situation where we're going to be going down that path. But power of attorney, you'll find, you can Google it, you'll get the government version of that form. It's quite easy to be able to follow the steps that are involved in there. It is important to get it signed off properly, so I would encourage you at a minimum to go to a JP to get it properly authorised so that you do things in the right way. I've seen one decline just recently because the people who are acting signed before the person who was granting it had signed, and the aged care home actually rejected it, even though the bank and the government had already accepted it.
Okay, this one I think is for Andy again. Sorry, you're the hot one today. Who is the best point of contact for VAD, which is voluntary assisted dying? So answer that one. That's
Okay, I will.
sorry.
So
There's
if
three
you-
parts to this one. Yep.
So it's a really fairly easy process. So if you can go on Google, it's a really good option. So you just Google QVAD, which is the Queensland Voluntary Assisted Dying statewide service. Heaps of information on there, but the best thing is they've got a free phone 1-800 number, and you can ring for further information. They will then put you in touch with the most appropriate person, whether it's a local representative from Metro North, for example, or it depends where you live in the country, but they'll be able to be your absolute source of information. So that's QVAD. If you just put in Voluntary Assisted Dying Queensland, it will come up.
And is an advanced health directive enough to choose QVAD or VAD?
It makes no difference what you've got in your advanced healthcare directive. So you have to have capacity. So advanced healthcare directive only comes in place when you've lost capacity, so you can't make decisions for yourself. To access voluntary assisted dying, you actually need to have capacity, so you need to be assessed by 2 independent doctors to say that you have capacity and you're making this decision of your own free will, and then you can access VAD. So it doesn't matter what you've got in your advanced healthcare directive.
And last one on this topic, is quality of life a reason for VAD?
So there's strict criteria, there's really strict criteria for accessing VAD, as you can imagine. And you need to have a life-limiting condition. You need to have a prognosis, so you need to be expected to die within 12 months, I think it is in Queensland, 6 to 12 months. And you need to be assessed that you're going to die from that illness. So there are certain things that are absolutely not included, something like dementia, mental health issues, young people below the age of 18 are unable to access VAD. So you have to prove, you don't have to prove it, but that you have to be seen to be having a fairly extensive suffering. But that's really defined by yourself, so it can be. So for example, some people will choose to have VAD once they're unable to provide personal cares for themselves. So once their family has to change a pad, for example, and they can't go to the toilet for themselves, that's when somebody with a life-limiting condition would choose to access VAD. For somebody else, it might be if they have pain that is unmanageable, then that's when they would choose to access VAD. For somebody else, it could be something like, so there's some dreadful head and neck cancers, and so it could be, if you've got an awful cancer that might be on your face or in your throat or something like that, then that's when they might access. But you have to have an expectation that you're going to die within 12 months.
Okay, next one. What are the advantages, disadvantages of having your will with a solicitor or family?
The advantage of having it with your solicitor is that they've got the original, they're able to lodge that with the Supreme Court, it's safe, you don't have someone who's potentially going to be pulling it apart and photocopying it, and then you get questions on, how do we know you didn't actually substitute a page here, because it's not in that original format with the staple. We can see that you've actually removed the staple. You don't want to be in that position. I love having it with solicitors. The disadvantage of having it with a solicitor is what happens if they retire. It's actually pretty easy. You go to the Queensland Law Society and then their packets have gone to whoever is holding them, so you can track that down. If it's with family, family could be it's open to misuse, so they could actually have, I'm getting an inheritance, so I'm making decisions based on what's in here. They could damage the document. It could be lost because, another person's gone, I don't like this, so I'm just going to get rid of it. So I'm a big fan of keeping the will with the lawyer.
Thank you. Maybe one for you, Paul. This is...
I thought I was getting out of it.
No, I'm going to
honestly,
ask a curly one. This is from me. This is about existential suffering. Do you think as people approach the end of life that if they haven't made peace that there can be an impact on physical symptoms? Have you seen that in your experience?
Yes, indeed. And I mean, sometimes a bit that the VAD and quality of life, sometimes it is all around the existential suffering, which then is hard to show medically because it's an existential thing. I had a World War II veteran who he had flown bombers over Germany and dropped bombs on Germany, and for him coming to the end of life, he never saw his victims, but he dreamt about the people that he killed. Which is just heartbreaking. And he'd been in church all his life, and in church we talk about forgiveness. all the time, and yet it was still, he was having trouble forgiving himself. And how am I going to face my Maker, knowing that I killed children and wives who had nothing to do with the war? And so that was a big existential crisis for him, and we worked with him as best we could. I had another lady just recently who would, and I mean, this is funny in that it's not existential, but she had been writing a book, sort of like a memoir, and wanted it published. She had cancer, she knew she was going to die, but she got sicker quicker, and suddenly she ran out of time. And that was, for her, that was a big existential, I wanted to get this done, but now I can't. And I happened, like, she was in my church and I happened to be her pastor, so I was visiting her, and when the family said, this is really causing distress, because I've written and published books, I was actually able to say, I can finish that off for you, which we did. She had written it all, it needed to be edited, and et cetera, and it was about 2 years later we finally launched that book, and it was actually we'd done the funeral 2 years later. So kind of the same crowd came back. We launched the book and gave out free copies to everyone, and it was actually just a real joyous time of kind of going, because it had taken longer than I'd hoped, because the family, trying to negotiate with the family. But in some ways, I thought the 2 years was kind of a nice, if we'd done it 6 weeks later, it would have been too early. But 2 years later, it was something very profound. So, and it is a strange thing in terms of, you would think that people who come to church would have made peace with death, but it's just, I actually think a lot of people join religion to kind of put death aside. It's been a strange experience of mine that people sort of think, I'm going to come to church so I don't have to think of death, as in, and then when they come to there, it's kind of they've never actually thought about it. There's been studies done on this, that we tend to think death is going to happen to someone else. It's a bit like everything else. That's going to happen to someone else and somehow I'm going to get out of it. But then it becomes real. And finally having the courage to face those questions that we've put off is, I train ministers to do funerals, and the first thing I tell them is, you have to make your own peace with death, because you're going to keep coming across it. And sometimes we've made this much peace with death, and then something will happen that just completely pulls the rug out from under us again, because, you know, we kind of think, oh, well, only old people die. But oh no, this was a young person, and only these kind of people die. But no, and suddenly you're starting to bury people your age and younger than you. So there is a whole lot of, I need more than 5 minutes to unpack that. But and in some ways, it's your own individual journey as well. It's not, here I've got the magic sauce that will work for you.
So following, sorry, Andy, please, yes.
Just from a symptom management point of view, so sometimes we can be caring for somebody who's dying and they just have unbearable pain sometimes. And, you think, I've given them all the really good drugs and we've done all of the other things that we can do, and you're really racking your brains as to why is this not working, and it is often because there's unresolved things. It can often be, and I've seen it so many times, they can often be, they've maybe fallen out with the brother or the child, and they're waiting to resolve that. I've seen people who, you guys will have all heard this, I'm sure, as well. So I've seen people who have said, I want to wait, I don't want to die until my grandchild is born. And you think, oh my gosh, that's like 4 weeks away. And they don't die until the grandchild is born. You see people who, very frequently, you guys at Karuna will know this, you see people very frequently who talk to people who have died previously, so the ancestors or the loved ones. There is also some research done by the universities, and it's an Australian research that talks about people who have PTSD for whatever reason, like, trauma from the past, who actually re-experience PTSD at a death at the very pointy end, and we had a lady up north recently who raged against her death and had really difficult symptoms to manage, but I just want to say that we managed them really well, and she died really, really peacefully, but it was more about giving medication. It wasn't only about giving the medication. There was lots and lots of work that we had to do. So the existential stuff can have a massive impact, I think, on your physical symptoms. And I think sometimes as health professionals, we can forget that. And it's all just about why have you got that sore leg or that sore belly, but actually there's a lot more to it than that. Give you that back.
Thank you.
Can I quote Bono again?
Oh, go for it.
We talk about dignity in dying, and I totally get that. Bono, in something else I read, was saying that when we come into life, when we're born, there's not much dignity. If you've been at a birth, there's blood, there's gooey stuff where, you know, there's not much dignity, and yet we survive that. And he actually says in death, we kind of hold on to this idea of dignity, but maybe the better attitude is like birth. It's kind of like that humility. This is something that's happening to us, and let's embrace it rather than, well, I want to be in control of this, and somehow I want to maintain my dignity. I think if we're battling it, then that's going to create issues. So, yeah, I don't remember my birth, so that's probably good, but I was there for my children's birth, and I felt like I was on a freight train I'm just holding on here, and I guess I feel that that's probably how the other end is going to be as well, and in some ways it's okay. I'm just going to hold on and trust.
Something that's held me in my clinical practice is understanding that as humans, we are physical beings, we're spiritual beings, we're social beings and psychological beings, that holistic aspect. And Dame Cecily Saunders, who's the mother of modern day palliative care, she was a nurse who trained to become a palliative care physician. She says that often as doctors and nurses, we just look at the physical aspect of dying, but unless we embrace the totality of who we are as people, that we don't address those existential. And I'm sure for the clinicians in the room, we've seen people die, you know, some difficult deaths because they haven't had their social, psychological, spiritual aspects addressed. And yet, you know, from a clinical perspective, they think they're getting excellent symptom management. So just remembering that really 3/4 of who we are is psychosocial, spiritual, social, that the physical part is just one aspect. Okay, back to wills. I've written a will in the UK. I now live in Australia. Do I need to rewrite my will here to be legal?
It is a good question, and I apologise that I was not able to answer it in the break. A lawyer is going to be the best person, so I'm not even going to try and pretend to be a lawyer. We have had people who recommended get a will for your assets wherever they are. So if your assets are in the UK, it's great to have a UK will. If your assets are in Australia, I would suggest that you also need an Australian will. Specifically, a Queensland will if your assets are in Queensland.
Excellent. Okay, back to Andy. If someone would like to die at home, do they need a doctor's referral or do they just ring palliative care directly?
That is a really tricky, that's a really broad question. So I'll just try to think of the relevant place. So usually what would happen if you wanted a referral to palliative care, you need somebody to refer you. That can be your GP. It can be somebody like myself as a nurse practitioner. It can be your specialist. So if you've got an oncologist or a renal specialist, then they'll refer you to palliative care. So you can't self-refer. Can you self-refer at Karuna? You can self-refer at Karuna, which is our community palliative care not-for-profit that works in Moreton Bay. I'm not speaking for you. But usually if you want a hospital-based specialist palliative care service, then you'll need a referral from somebody, and it's usually your GP or your specialist. As a nurse practitioner in the regions that I work in, then I can refer to palliative care. I can also do referrals to hospice, but it's having a conversation with the right person, and I guess you've got to work out who the right person is. If in doubt, you need to speak to your GP. That's all right, isn't it?
GP is a good gateway. Yep.
It's just really varied from where you live and
it
which
is
specialist
varied.
service you take.
But here in Metro North,
Yes.
it's generally through your GP or if
Yes.
you're already connected to
Correct.
a palliative care service.
Correct, or
Yeah.
your specialist, like your oncologist, because they refer to palliative care. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, how can aged care homes better support families with a loved one that has commenced at end of life? Sorry, Andy.
So there is a programme that I'm pretty confident works in Metro North. It's called SPACE, so it's Specialist Access to Palliative Care, and they have it has recently been a nurse practitioner, it could have changed, and they have a doctor that actually will do what's called needs assessments in residential aged care. So they will review, they'll speak to the staff, they have to be invited in, of course. They'll speak to the staff and they will do a needs assessment round for people who they think might be requiring palliative care. Very broad, but they'll have a little look and they'll do things like family conferences, they'll support with symptom management, etc. There is also I think it's federally funded program which is called PACOP, which is specifically about palliative care in aged care. And so what we use in palliative care, I'll just take it one step back, what we use in palliative care when we're looking at symptoms is we use a particular set of guidelines when we're looking at symptoms, and we're kind of, all of us are doing the same thing. So we're looking at how somebody's living, how they're managing, what the symptoms are, and then we kind of score it on a PACOP tool, it's called. And then they have done this very same thing for aged care, but it has extra things like looking at frailty, looking at families and making recommendations about that. So that's a government funded program. They send people specifically into aged care, usually nurses, but send particularly in aged care, and work with the staff to look at and being consistent with how they manage people at end of life. But it really, really is residential aged care dependent. And they have to really buy into these programs, and not all of them do as well, even though you think when you go in aged care, you're really not coming out of that alive often. Sometimes people do are in aged care and then come home to die, but that's not super common. So you really just have to have a conversation with your particular residential aged care, but there are programs available out there. It's just whether we'll take them on or not. It's really tricky to.
And a very practical thing is to ask for a family meeting. So I've worked in community and residential aged care, and I think if your loved one is approaching end of life, that you get together with the nursing home staff and actually sit down and have a family meeting and talk about what you want and what the loved one wants. Okay, this one's to the panel. This is a great question. At Karuna, we recognise the importance of death literacy. How do you feel we can better promote this? Maybe Paul and Sam, we haven't heard from you.
I haven't talked in a little while,
let's
I'll
go.
jump in. So one of the things that we're doing, again, it's still very broad, but we set up a website called our End of Life Learning Hub, and we're coordinating with a lot of nursing homes and a lot of other companies to try and facilitate essentially this event in a digital space so that we can sort of reach out and give people the advice and give them the chance to search, because everyone learns in different ways and absorbs information in different ways. So we have events like this where you physically come and you can physically talk to us and ask us questions. We have the website where we put it's a big information dump there. You can go through and have a look at different aspects. We also have Leah's running our Honouring Life division, doing a podcast and having one-on-one information sessions in these podcasts which answer some of those burning questions. So death literacy, like we've said at the start, it's very hard, it's very taboo, and people think talking about it you're going to catch something. But like I said, I've been around doing 10 years of funerals and I haven't gone, so it's a pretty good sign that I talk about it every day and I'm still here. So don't be afraid to ask those questions, and really it comes down to doing exactly what you're doing, having the courage to seek out the information, I think is a big one.
Paul, thoughts on death literacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think events like this, what you're talking about, I know my own denomination, I was talking to someone yesterday, they were trying to promote workshops for making wills, and they were sort of working the phones to get people there, and they had people hang up on them and sort of rail at them to sort of, you're trying to steal my money and things like that. And they were quite shocked because they said, we're actually out here trying to help people. It is a challenge because we live in a society. You talked about having, the body at home. There's all different things that you see what other cultures do, whereas we tend to ship it all up, put it in a box and hide it. My mum remembers that funerals when she was a child happened out of your home. As in, person would pass away, the body would be at the home, people would come and visit. And this is white European, and the funeral actually happened out of the home. And I'm going, wow, I didn't know that. It didn't always happen in churches. It didn't always happen in funeral parlours. So death was a bit more normal. And I don't know how we get back to that except to have these kind of events. And also, the person I talked to yesterday had never heard of a death cafe. That's another name for them? And she said, oh, death cafe. And I'm going, yeah, no, it's an intentional movement. Yeah, I suppose in some organisations, with our seniors group at the church, we would try and get different speakers in to come and talk about aspects of end-of-life preparation, which was good that we got that community listening. So, yeah, how do we make connection with retirement communities where we can have these conversations? But it's not just retirement communities. But it is a big challenge, yeah. How do we make people... You need to face those existential dreads, yeah.
And I think as a society, we do have organisations like Karuna, obviously Palliative Care Queensland. They do host events, but how do we get the general public accessing those? Because often it's only when you've got somebody dying that you want to or are interested.
And we are trying.
Yeah, I know you are. I mean, Cornerstone do fantastic programs. It's how do we advertise that?
Like I'm on radio and on Reels these days, which is not quite TikTok, and that I do talk about grief and death and dying on that. I talk about domestic violence. There's a bunch of issues that I talk about that aren't always talked about, and that's one of the ways that I'm trying to help people consider these things and try and do it in a way that, oh, okay, I hadn't thought of that. So, yeah, I happen to have that avenue, but...
Did anybody else want to talk about death literacy? Andy?
Just very quickly, so I've seen a real big change with the advent of social media, I suppose, and so I'm not on TikTok, and I'm old, so I am on Facebook. Apparently nobody below the age of 50 is on Facebook, my children tell me, anyway. But I've seen a lot of younger people on Instagram, because that's a bit cooler, talk about death and share their grief story. So I think that's a really powerful thing, and maybe that generation will be better at it than this generation, my generation. But the advent of that and people sharing the journeys and sharing about what it's like when somebody dies and then your journey after that and how grief is, and like quite young people, like in the 20s and early 30s. So,
and that's why days like today have been on the calendar to try and create a natural opportunity to talk about it. Okay, shifting gears a little, what services are available for those working in this industry that can help with mental health support?
Yeah, so it's a big one. It's something we talked about last year at the Dying to Know Day event, and what brought around the book that we've got on our table, which we're sort of shifted a little bit to going, well, we want to make sure everything we're doing is caring not only for the deceased, but for the whole family and those connected to the person. And so we came up with a grief journal that has simple colouring in pages and then easy prompts on the side just to start considering, because again, like we're all different. Some people benefit greatly from having someone close to them they can just talk about the situation and discuss it with them. Others, they internalize it a lot, and so having a grief journal, a colouring in book to sort of guide them on that journey is a good stepping stone for them. They may not be comfortable talking about their feelings openly. So for people who are in a caring environment, we're doing a lot of training with nursing homes and talking about not just about looking after residents, because a lot of them do that exceptionally well, but actually looking after the staff as well. There's very high turnover rates and burnout with people who care, and we're attributing a lot of that to the fact that they're connecting with these people over many years, and every day they're losing someone. Just about every week they're losing someone that they've spent years with. So I know there is some organisations out there that can assist with people. There's a lot of grief counselling. Grief Australia is one of the big ones that you can access. But again, it's about, I think, a lot of the big organisations taking a bit of responsibility for that, and a lot of them are where they have internal programs, or they allow us to come in even to do training and things like that. So it is sort of shifting, but I think it requires a lot more people to stand up and say this is a need, and it's a great need.
This one's an important question, and certainly as a state member, I actually get a lot of these inquiries through my office. So can someone explain, if a patient's in a Queensland health facility and deemed as a nursing home type patient and they've been in hospital over 30 days, what are the options because they've experienced bullying by social workers to get them out? So I'll speak to that just from a practical point of view. So Queensland health facilities have what we call a 28-day acute bed day cycle. So they do try to get patients out within that 28 days. And unfortunately, because we are bed blocked often in our hospitals, if you do have somebody that's awaiting nursing home placement or needs extended care, there isn't care options at home. We do have extended care units, but there's limited beds for those. We have Brighton here. We've got the Zilmere Transitional Care. Redcliffe Hospital, if we just speak locally, does have an extended care unit, but there is a time limit. And so it's unfortunate if you felt bullied by a social worker, that's probably because they've got pressure on them to get people out of hospital. And clinicians do talk, we've got to get these people out. And having worked with the Executive Director at Redcliffe Hospital, we are looking at another option, a modular ward, where there are, at any given time, 30 people at Redcliffe Hospital awaiting nursing home placement. But it's kind of that betwixt and between. They can't really stay in an acute facility because they're not acutely unwell, but if there's nowhere else for them to go, there is a challenge and pressure on the system. So there's no easy answer to that. Obviously, awaiting home care packages, getting care in home, you need a carer at home. If you don't have a carer, you live on your own. There really is a shortage for that extended age care support until you can find placement. Did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, no, I was going to talk about the last question. I've got a training manual for doing funerals, and like I talk about, you need to do your own existential, but then you need to put a self-care regimen in place. In my industry, where as ministers we need to have a professional supervisor, I don't know, it's probably not mandatory for you guys. So that's meeting with a professional who can talk these things through. And I mean, we have a whole bunch of practical stuff in there, like when you're working in the death space a lot, it's kind of like you need to find the balance at the other end. So we say, get involved in a kindy or a play group and spend time with young children and get the other side of life so that it's not that burnout. So my job has that balance, whereas I know your job doesn't necessarily have that balance. And some personalities are made for those spaces, and others it is something you need to come and go. But yeah, building who are your friend networks, what's your exercise, what's your... I can send you my 2 or 3 page thing that I give to my people about what's your self-care routine in this space. Some of it's you manage, but some of it's also that methods outside you.
So that's a perfect place to end. There were 2 questions from you guys about that. So one was addressed to you, Andy. How do you look after yourself with such a challenging role? But then one to all of you, how do you practice self-care? So maybe if we finish on that, just, 60 seconds each, what do you each do, given that you both, all of you, work in this space?
Yeah, so I'm a pretty resilient person. It doesn't mean that I'm not affected by the work that I do, because I absolutely am. And sometimes it can be different triggers. So often if it's a child that is a similar age to my children, so now that I'm 50, if it's a person that is this similar age to me, or my husband, then that can be really difficult. But I'm very mindful, and so I practice, this sounds really airy-fairy, but I practice gratefulness every single day, and I deliberately force myself to do that. And it can be, gosh, that's a really pretty bird, or look at that sun, or I love walking my dogs, those type of things. I do exercise. I'm a member of the Redcliffe Red Dragons. We just Dragon Boat Club, paddle out of Newport, and I do that deliberately so that I'm not constantly thinking about what I do. I went on the spiritual care of the dying course that is run by Karuna, and it was very full on, and you look at your own death and you think about your own death, and I felt I could actually do that. When I was asked to think about the death of a loved one and my children, it's not somewhere that I could go. But I think it's just recognising your own limits, knowing when to ask for help, and having supportive people around you. And my poor husband puts up with an awful lot from me, but I'm very grateful to have him. My kids are aware of what death and dying is, and they have been from being very young, and I do shield them from it a little bit. But we have those conversations in the house, and I think it's really about asking for help if you need help, being mindful in your practice, and if you don't feel like going to do Pilates, I love Pilates, or you don't feel like going to do a paddle, to actually really making the effort to do that, and also to get good sleep and to rest. That's a lot. Whew, what's 60 seconds?
My self-care routine is I go for a walk every morning. I've got my community. I know my barista. I know all the dogs in the area. I play with flowers once a month and create things. So that's, it's leaning into some of the creativity, because my work is very head-based, and I have people who are very... I get to see what's going on for them. They're opening up to me. So it's trying not to carry their load and balancing it that way.
Yeah, for me, a lot of people don't realise this about funeral homes, but majority of the staff are on call because people pass in the middle of the night at 1 or 2 in the morning. Someone's got to go and look after them, and that's generally us. So for the last 10 years, I've had it where I could be called at any moment to go and pick someone up. So for me, very important in the last couple of years especially, has been about really honouring my time and actually taking time for myself. So whether that's going on trips to Fraser Island with the family and friends, or just spending time with my family, I think that's really important to live. And a lot of people think that if you're around funerals, death and dying, you'll be a very sad, depressed kind of person. But one of the beautiful things about funerals is you get to hear all these stories that you would never, ever get to hear otherwise. And some of the stuff that gets shared is really amazing. These life stories that you never would get to hear, and given my love language is acts of service, so me being able to look after a family actually fills my tank rather than depletes me. So for me, a lot of my self-care is just making sure that I'm honouring the families that I'm looking after.
And I think the thing I'll add goes back, I think, to something you said in terms of, if you think you're invincible, that's when you're in trouble. You have to be okay with saying, I'm vincible. It's not a word we use. But it's vulnerability is actually your strength, because that's when you do say, I need to talk about this. So being able to self-monitor, and that can take a little bit of time to work out that when things start drying up, like if I'm getting angry, if I've got short temper, my creativity dries up. They're the initial signs that, I need to see my supervisor. I need to go and watch a movie, go for a walk. What are my things? So whenever we think I don't need anyone else, I think that's when we're in trouble.
That's excellent. Thank you. Well, what do you think? We've covered most of the questions. Let's give a big round of applause to our